Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. My name is Alexis Kleiman, and I'm the chair of NEXTNiagara. On behalf of the entire council, I'd like to welcome you to Engage 2022. Thank you for joining us here today. For those who are newly engaging with NEXTNiagara, we're an advisory council of the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce. Our mission is to amplify the voice of the next generation here in Niagara. We do that through professional and personal development opportunities, advocacy, and events just like this one here today. I'm going to throw it to our Vice Chair, Kristen Nilsson, to begin our time together with a land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Alexis. We want to begin this event by acknowledging that the land on which many of us are gathered on today is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place and know that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and contributions of Indigenous peoples. We recognize the contribution of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples in shaping and strengthening this region, the province, and the country. If you're joining us from outside the Niagara region today, we encourage you to research the traditional lands that you are on through websites like nativeland.ca.
Thank you, Kristen. We'd also like to thank our sponsors for powering this event and making this event possible here today. Thank you to our title sponsors, Niagara Economic Development and DDL & Co., our main stage presenter, Niagara Community Foundation, and the other sponsors who made today possible, including RBC Royal Bank, Niagara College Canada, CAA Niagara, 610 CKTB, King Events, and Move 105.7. We would also like to thank the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce for providing us with this platform and give a special shout out to our NEXTNiagara Event Subcommittee for all of their efforts in planning this event here today. We'd also like to acknowledge, while we begin, all of our speakers for lending their time and expertise to this event. We truly appreciate you spending your morning with us and providing us with inspiration and new knowledge.
So before we jump into the programming, we just want to review a few housekeeping items to make the morning as enriching as possible for you. So hopefully above my head, you can see some navigation links, but know that you can click on the lobby at any time to access all the functionalities of the event platform. So we're currently in the main stage. This is where our keynote will take place, as well as our Real Talk panel. Those are happening one right after the other, so you can stay here for a little bit before you have to move on. Once we're done with the panel, we will move out to the breakout rooms where you can access all of our speakers, and know that closing remarks will take place in the breakout sessions. We have the agenda, so you can hop in there and review it at any point throughout the event, check the session times, tailor your day. Just to note that we will have a 30-minute break after our first breakout session. So you can check some emails, take a break from your workspace, get a refreshment, and then we'll start back up at 11:30. So again, just hop into the agenda to make sure you know where you want to be when. You can learn more about our sessions and speakers in those tabs. And as I mentioned, when we're in the breakout room sessions, you'll be using the breakout room tabs. Just click on the click join session for the session you want to attend, and a Zoom link will open up. If there's something that you're going to miss, all of the sessions are recorded, so we'll be emailing them to everyone next week. You can learn all about the sponsors that Alexis mentioned in the sponsors tab. And then hopefully most importantly, just a reminder that since this is a hybrid event, we're in our virtual component right now, we do have our in-person social taking place this evening at Ironwood, and tickets are still available for that portion. So we'd love to see you come out and network. There'll be entertainment, refreshments, an opportunity to get headshots to update your professional profile. So just click on the register for 2022 tab at any point throughout the day to join us. You can learn a little bit more about the vendors who will be at our in-person session through the Marketplace tab. And lastly, if you want to be featured on our social wall, you can post about your conference experience by tagging us at NEXTNiagara to participate. We'd love to see how the day's going for everybody.
Thank you for that great overview, Kristen. I do hope that everyone will explore our event platform. And before we jump into our very exciting keynote, I would like to play a video by our title sponsors, Niagara Economic Development and DDL & Co. If you're joining us first thing here this morning, this is likely the moment you've been waiting for. I am excited to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Laura Whaley, who you may know as your work bestie from Instagram or TikTok. Upon graduating in university with a degree in business in 2016, Laura started her career in the corporate world. She has always been a creative individual and directed this creativity into various outlets over the years. One of those outlets became making videos in early 2020 that poked fun in the corporate world, bringing to light experiences that many could relate to in their own working lives. Over the last year and a half, she has built a community of over 1.7 million work besties on TikTok and over 1.3 on Instagram. Her content has evolved over time, touching on many work-related topics, including what it can really be like to work from home, or how to professionally say things we often think in the workplace, as well as a topic she's very passionate about and here to talk to us today about, which is professional boundaries. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me. What a lovely introduction. It's always nice to be introduced by someone else. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation at work where, you're told, can we go around the room and introduce ourselves, state what we do at the company and a little fun fact. And I always cringe in those moments. My anxiety is just uber heightened. I panic. I'm like, well, I don't know what I do in this company anymore. What a fun fact about me. I have none. So thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to speak about something I'm quite passionate about, professional boundaries, something that I've been navigating through my career when I first started up until today, and I will remain to navigate this throughout my entire journey. So, why did I start speaking about professional boundaries? I mean, we touched on it a little bit in the introduction, but TikTok is really where it kind of had its start. So if we go to the slide with the picture, yeah, perfect. The next one. Yep. Here we go. Okay, where it all started. We're good. We're golden. We're rocking and rolling now. All right. So I had a series go viral on TikTok about, the coworker who doesn't understand boundaries. And you know what? Let's take a look at a video if you haven't seen them for yourself.
If you work on this through the weekend, you should be able to get it done by Monday. While I'm unable to work this weekend, I will ensure this gets prioritized during my working hours. Why can't you work this weekend? I work through the weekends all the time. I was unaware that overtime was available this weekend, but for future reference, where should I bill those hours? When you joined this team, I thought you said you worked hard. Yes, I said I was a hard worker. Not that I would sacrifice my personal time for this job. To you to live.
So in these videos, yes, they're a little bit sassy. There's always a boundary that's reinstated in the video. But the really cool thing about these videos is they reach people from all around the world and they create such amazing conversation in the comment section. People talking about their experiences with boundaries, people maybe disagreeing or agreeing with a boundary. And that's really what started me speaking about my journey with professional boundaries, how I view them, how I kind of go about defining them, setting them and establishing them and all of that. And that's what I'm here to speak with you about today. So getting into the agenda a little bit, we're going to touch on what are boundaries, what are professional boundaries, why should I set them in my career? Setting professional boundaries all the way from figuring out what on earth kind of boundary do I need to set, all the way to implementing it and maintaining it. We're going to touch too on effective communication because it's incredibly important when we talk about boundaries, especially within our careers. And then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A. So what are boundaries? A very, textbook definition, it's the practice of openly communicating and asserting values in order to reserve or protect against having them compromised. That definition is giving me dictionary. So another one that more resonates with me is rules and guidelines we implement that tell others how we'd like to be treated. And when we implement this into our professional lives, limits and rules that we set between our professional and personal lives to ensure that the line between employer, our job, our work, and ourself, our employee, doesn't get blurred, and why should we set boundaries? So again, it's all about not having that line blurred, maintaining that healthy relationship between our personal and professional lives. It can help improve our work-life structure. We often hear people talk about work-life balance. Does it exist? Sure, maybe, but it looks wildly different for everyone. And in implementing and understanding our boundaries, we create a much better work-life structure for ourselves, work-life integration and all of that. Reduces, frustration, resentment, reduces stress, helps us stay in control. When we have boundaries in place, we start to define our own rules. It gives us a lot more sense of control, reduces speed of burnout. I always say, I have yet to meet anyone in their career that doesn't hit burnout. I think it's inevitable. But I also don't think burnout is a sign of failure. It doesn't mean you failed at all. It's, to me, when I reach burnout, it's my kind of notice to go, okay, Laura, take a step back. What do you need right now? How are your boundaries? And so that boundaries plays a huge part into, my journey with burnout. It helps improves our ability to self-care, building confidence, sets clear expectations with ourselves, with our employees, with our families, with everyone in our lives. And a huge one here, especially as young professionals, so we don't adopt boundaries. Defining our own doesn't allow us to take on the boundaries or lack thereof of those around us as we enter the workforce. It's really, really easy and common to take on what our managers do, our bosses' bosses. We see them working on a weekend and suddenly we go, should I be checking my emails on the weekend? And so that's what we want to avoid with taking a look at our own boundaries here. And a note on that is not everyone's boundaries will look the same. And I really can't emphasize that enough, is there is no right or wrong when it comes to boundaries. It's what's right for you and what might not resonate with you. So as we start to look at setting professional boundaries, there's 3 buckets that I find very helpful in doing this. One, we want to establish the boundary. What is the boundary we're looking to implement? We want to implement it, putting it into practice, and then we want to maintain it. We want to reinforce it. So getting into the establishing piece of professional boundaries, just some tips and tricks and notes here. Like I said earlier, your manager's boundaries do not need to define your own. So take away everyone else around you in your working life and their boundaries and how they operate. Get that out of your brain when you start to really think about, what do I want to establish as a boundary for me? What makes sense for me? And we often aren't aware of a boundary until it's been violated. And it's a really, really important thing to note as we navigate within our careers. If something happens and comes up and makes us feel, it gives us the ick, if you will, note that down, because likely there's a boundary that needs to be set in place there that's not currently in practice. Your boundaries will change with every season of your life. It's not, okay, these are the boundaries I'm going to establish today that make sense for me, and then I'm never going to look at them again. You need to reevaluate them, and they're going to change, and they're going to move a lot through each season of life. How you feel in a certain situation can be an indicator of what boundaries you need to set, similar to the not being aware of the boundary until it's been violated. So moving on to the self-assessment piece, which is a huge thing for me when I'm establishing my own professional boundaries. It's figuring out, what are my current life priorities? How do I define success in my professional life? What are my career goals? What do I value in a job? And what are my non-negotiables? And as we start to answer these questions, we learn more about how work makes sense in our lives, how we'd like work structure to exist within our entire life. And another practice that I have found very valuable is asking yourself how I want to work. Asking yourself, how does work look like in my entire life? And so moving to the next slide, we often, as we grow up, we get asked all the time, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to be and all that? But we never really take a step back to say, how do I want to work when I grow up? How many hours a day am I looking to work? What kind of environment? Remove the job from it and just think about work in general and the structure of that. What kind of relationship do I want to have with my colleagues? How digitally connected am I? How many breaks am I taking throughout the day? Is travel a big part of a working life that I see for me or not? Asking ourselves these questions will give us a much better idea of how our work life ideally likes to be structured. And then we can start to see in there, hey, boundaries might need to be placed in certain areas depending on my own needs. So there's 6 major buckets that I look at when I'm setting my professional boundaries. Technology, especially in today's working world, we're all so digitally connected. Working from home, it's even increased that. So boundaries surrounding technology. Boundaries surrounding working time. So think of that as, the time you sign into work to the time you sign out, the time that happens during that. How do you manage it? How do you prioritize it? Working relationships. So with your managers, with your coworkers, what boundaries need to be set within that? And physical boundaries, this all comes down to your physical needs. You know, how can I be comfortable physically while I am working at the job? What do I need in that element? And then there's personal time and space. So we're setting professional boundaries in our personal time and space. And we'll touch on a little bit more on all these buckets moving forward. And then the last one is mental and emotional boundaries. And that plays a lot into mental health here. So how does work play into my identity, my mental health, my worth, and all that? So when we look at technology, these are just some examples of possible boundaries, and you can read these and you can be like, nope, doesn't make sense for me, not for me, and that's fine. You might see some of these that resonate with you a little bit more, and that's cool too. But just giving some examples of how this could possibly look. So not having work on your personal phone. You know, maybe you just say, if I need a work phone, great, but it's going to be a separate phone than I have personally, and that's how I'd like to engage. Silencing notifications. You know, we're constantly getting notifications all day, every day. And for me, it's incredibly distracting when I'm getting all these beeps and everything coming through. So for me, I silence notifications. Logging off and shutting down at the end of the day, you know, utilizing your online statuses, do not disturb when you're trying to have focus time. So it's stuff like that. Limiting time on social media. I do want to touch on this one because I guarantee someone out there right now is on their phone, and that's fine. I'm not offended. But we tend to use our phones quite a bit in our working lives, and they do aid in procrastination. I will give them that. But sometimes it becomes quite a disturbance, and it's not so much used as a break, but it's taking up a lot of time in our working hours. And so limiting use of social media, even though that's a personal, you know, engagement with technology, it is existing in our working time. So being mindful of things like that too when we look at technology and boundaries there. So the next bucket, working time. So the time you log on to the time you sign off. Setting working hours. That's always been a big one for me. I sign off on at the same time every day. I sign off at the same time every day. And that's a boundary that I've had in place for years. It also touches on things like prioritizing your workload. You know, we get constantly people, can I have this? Can I have this? I need your attention. I need your attention. And the thing with that is that's great. And we want to help our coworkers. We really do. And we will. But prioritizing our own workload allows us to, you know, engage in the activities in which we were hired to do, and then supporting our coworkers where it makes sense for us. So maybe a boundary surrounding that, you know, blocking out focus time in your calendar. A big one for me is checking emails during a certain time window instead of constantly monitoring them all day. That's a boundary I've set in place for myself. It aids in my productivity, in my focus. And so you kind of have to figure out what works for you and set the boundary around that. But these are some examples within working time. And then moving on to our next bucket, so personal time and space. This one could be a little bit tricky. So dedicated workspace when working from home. And this is a big one, especially from those of us that, you know, have been working from home the last few years, those of us that will continue to into the future. When I am at home, this is my working space. Work does not follow me to the kitchen. It does not follow me into the bedroom. It does not follow me onto the couch. This is my working space. You know, and that's a boundary I've set in place for myself to be able to mentally I don't want work taking up my entire personal space, but I do really like working from home. So this allows me to be able to keep that separation. Not working during vacations, no work talk at the dinner table, not answering work calls on your time off, all kind of things surrounding that. And then our next bucket here, I believe, is working relationships. So you need to figure out how you want to engage when it comes to your coworkers, when it comes to your managers. Maybe you don't want coworkers on social media. You don't want to be sharing personal information at work. And so you need to set boundaries and rules in place for that. Rules of contact. Maybe you have a coworker who is constantly DMing you or texting you, and you're like, you know, I do not want to engage on my personal platforms in a working relationship. So maybe that's a boundary that you need to set too. Reducing contact with negative employees while remaining professional. This one I get asked a lot is, I have this toxic coworker and, you know, I don't know how to engage with them. And you can set a boundary there, which basically just means you will engage with this person at the bare minimum you need to in order to successfully complete your job, but nothing beyond that. And that's a boundary that I found really impactful, very powerful to put in play with myself when it comes to dealing with people that are more negative or more toxic to me. And then we get into the physical, boundaries. And these are all things like taking breaks, having a proper lunch, refusing to work under unsafe circumstances, having an ergonomic office setup. So not allowing work to let the physical body basically suffer throughout the day. And that's pretty straightforward. So you need to figure out what that looks like for you, what you physically need throughout those working hours in the day, and then create boundaries based on that. And then our last bucket here, this is the mental and emotional. And this is one I'm extremely passionate about. And this all really comes down to our mental health. So the practice of mentally disconnecting in off hours is much easier said than done, don't get me wrong. But when you close your laptop at the end of the day, are you still thinking about work? And I often tell people, it's not really a break if you're still thinking about work. And then some people are like, well, in that logic, I haven't taken a break in 8 years. And it's like, that might be something that you need to sort of reevaluate, because we do need breaks from work. How are we supposed to show up for our job and give it all that we have if we're not focusing on ourselves, if we're just letting every other piece of ourselves just start to, disintegrate over time? So setting these mental and emotional barriers is really important. Separating self-worth from work is also another one that I've had in practice for many years. It's very powerful for me. Might not work for you, but it's this idea that work is what I do. Work is not who I am. And I've had this in practice for years, and I'm going to tell you why. If I get fired tomorrow from my job, it would be, very upsetting, and financially I'd have to figure it out, and I'm going through all these emotions. But if my identity, if my self-worth is so tied to that job, I didn't just lose the job. I lost a piece of myself. And that is so difficult to fill the void of and start to build that back up. So that's a boundary that it's one of my non-negotiables, if you will. Prioritizing mental health, giving yourself permission to say no, and all of those kind of things that help keep and protect our emotional and mental well-being. All right, so we've got, some boundaries. Hopefully we're starting to think of things that, yes, those make sense for us, and we can integrate these into life. When it comes to implementing, I always like to, okay, I established this boundary. I want to set this into place. I'm going to apply a primary implementation method to it, whether that's communication or action. For example, if I am really dedicated to signing off at 5 o'clock every day, that's going to be done through action. That's my primary method there. I'm doing it. I'm signing off every day at 5 o'clock. If it's more in, saying no to certain things, or when your workload is so busy that you can't take anything else on, that's communication. So just figuring out what makes sense for you there. Setting boundaries early. It is a lot easier to set and maintain a boundary if you do it early on in your job. And that's because coworkers respect action over time. They start to learn how you'd like to be treated. And that's really what we're doing through boundaries, is we're teaching people how we want to be treated. So if I'm trying to set this boundary, if I sign off every day at 5 o'clock, and then on Tuesday, I'm like, I could work till 6. And my coworker is like, hey, can you 5:30 have a meeting? Yeah, okay, I can make that work. And you have this boundary, but you're not making action on it, and you're not constantly reinforcing it. People aren't going to really respect that boundary over time, because it's not really in play. It's kind of a when you pick and choose to have it, so setting them early will help create expectation management, which is a huge thing when it comes to setting boundaries. And I will say, setting the boundary is your responsibility. Respecting it and supporting it, however, is the responsibility of your employer, your manager, and your coworkers. So moving to the next slide here, effective communication is truly at the core of setting boundaries. And I will give you a couple things to keep in mind as we're communicating boundaries. Communicate in real time. If I'm getting a meeting invite at 5:30 and my boundary is I'm working till 5, you communicated that at the time. You accept the meeting invite, go, and then a week later say, hey, by the way, I know last week we had this meeting, but I don't work past 5. It doesn't really work that way. You need to communicate in real time when the boundary gets crossed. Keep it professional. At the end of the day, this is our job. It is a professional environment. We need to communicate in a professional manner. There is a very respectful way that we can communicate our boundaries, and we need to sort of be mindful of that as we're communicating the boundary. I always say educate and remind versus go into defense. So coworkers are going to forget your boundaries sometimes. It's not their responsibility to memorize them. And instead of going into this defensive mode, remind and educate them. So an example here is, thank you for circulating this meeting invite. I'm unable to attend as my working hours are 8 to 5. So reinstating kind of the boundary of your working hours. I will keep an eye out for the meeting minutes. So you're offering kind of a solution for that. Versus I've told you numerous times, I don't work evenings, so I'm not attending. There's a huge difference when we talk about communication there and how it's received. And another big thing when it comes to communicating boundaries is excuses versus refusal. So if you are, invited to this 5:30 meeting and you're like, oh, I can't stay late today because I have to pick up my dog from the vet, or because I have this appointment, or because I have this, that's translated to the coworker as, well, she just can't attend today, but if I send her 5:30 meeting requests in the future, it's fine. Versus my workday finishes at 5 and I don't work in the evenings. That's letting them know what your boundary is and without an excuse tied to it, right? It's quite powerful to include within your communication there. All right, so maintaining your boundaries. Again, I'm going to talk about it till it's dead. Communicate. It's key. Action. Repetition helps build respect over time. It helps teach people how we'd like to be treated. Acting like the person you want to become. So it is very challenging to set boundaries. It can be really challenging to say no, to start speaking up for yourself, to implement these things. But you got to just keep telling yourself, okay, I'm acting like the person I'd like to become. And then one day you're like, I'm here. I've become her. And then you take a moment and you're like, I am so proud of myself for this. But it does take time. It does take repetition. Another tool you could use is discussing your boundaries. So, if you're starting working on a new team with new people, ask people, what are your communication boundaries here? How do you like to be communicated with? Are you available after hours? And it opens up dialogue, and then you can kind of communicate your boundaries back. Another big thing here is creating structures that support your boundaries. So again, in the example of not working outside of your working hours, if you're noticing that you're trying to communicate things, you're struggling a little bit, and you really want, another layer of additional support, maybe set an out of office outside of your working hours that basically remind people of, my working hours are X time to X time, and that is when you can expect a response from me. Something as simple as that can be quite effective when you are maintaining your boundaries. Okay, so what to do when a boundary is crossed? So 4 things here I would strongly encourage is you don't need to spend time validating or explaining your boundary. You don't need to say why you have it in place. Stating it is enough. I don't work on the weekends. It's not, I don't work on the weekends because I have this going on and this going on and this. I don't work on the weekends is enough. Don't take it personally. I think oftentimes we get so caught up in our own stuff, and our coworkers are just as much caught up in their own stuff, and they'll forget, they'll slip up. Sometimes they'll push boundaries a little bit, but try not to take it personally. Communication's key in this. I'm sorry, I'm unable to assist with that workload this weekend as I will not be working, and that's enough. I understand with boundaries that, especially within our professional lives, is we're going to have to make exceptions. We're paying the bills at the end of the day, and exceptions they're kind of inevitable in certain boundaries, I will say. But that's okay, as long as you understand that that is the exception and not the rule. And you need to communicate that as well. If someone is asking you to work on the weekend, and it's an absolute emergency, like a real emergency this time, and you're going to assist. You could say something like, I don't typically work weekends, so you're restating your boundary there. But given this is an emergency, I'm willing to assist. And then the last one here is just offer an alternative sometimes when a boundary gets crossed there. So in this example here, I'm unable to work on the weekend, restate your boundary, but I can prioritize this first thing on Monday. Offering that will help over time, just make things a little bit easier, and different tools there to implement when the boundaries do get crossed. This slide. All right. So I want you to think about boundaries. Once you have, you start to get some boundaries in your head of things that you want to set. we need to look at a holistic view of our professional lives. There's three main buckets here. Your professional boundaries, so basically your guiding principles and rules that you're going to be setting for your professional life, okay? Your career goals. You know, what are my career goals? How do I define success? And then your employer's definition of success. And this is a big one here. So what does the company value? What behaviors do they reward? What traits do high performers in the company have? You know, and it's really important here to start to understand, if I have a boundary that says I'm not working past 5 o'clock, you know, I log off at the end of the day at 5 o'clock every day. I'm going to keep going back to that boundary. And your career goal says, I want to be at a management position within a year. Great. Love that for you. So fun. You can totally do that. But then your employer's definition of success is hard work equals working overtime. Hard work equals no work-life separation. They're only promoting people at the company that are working around the clock. That boundary might be aligned with your goals, because you can absolutely work hard given your allotted time of working. But your employer has a very different definition of success than you do. And so that might be something that you need to look at and say, okay, if that is truly my career goals, am I at the right employer? Or are there other boundaries here that make more sense to be able to implement in this career, this employer that I'm working for here? And so that's always a good spot check that I like to do. Once I do have the boundaries I'd like to put in place, just kind of validating them against my own career goals. And then also the employer that I work for, do they make sense? Is it going to be supported and respected, or is this going to end up being a huge friction point between me and my coworkers? Oh, strong boundaries create strong employees. I believe that so wholeheartedly. And when we think about boundaries, I don't want you to think, you know, it's me first. It's always me first in front of the employer. No, 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 no. It's me also. You know, work takes up so much of our lives. It really does at the end of the day. And if you are not looking out for yourself, if you're not even considering what you need in this life, in this working environment, it's not gonna end well. I can tell you that. You're gonna hit a nice burnout. You're gonna lose sense of identity. You're gonna get so intertwined with this job that it's just gonna take over everything. There will be no separation. So when we think about boundaries, don't think about me first, but it's just me also. What do I need? Being in control of your life, especially in your working world, leads to a greater sense of control in your professional life. Yeah, goes hand in hand. We have control in our professional life. We feel a little more control in our personal life. We set boundaries in our professional life. We start to set more in our personal life. Showing up for yourself allows you to show up for work. You know, if I'm not filling up my cup, I have nothing to pour from. I am not able to show up every day for work and be super productive and give it my all, because not every day we're going to feel great showing up for work, but at least if we're taking care of ourselves, we can kind of lessen the amount of days that we show up and we just do not feel like working today. You know, it helps us strengthen relationships. As we start to implement our own boundaries, we start to respect the boundaries of those around us a little bit more too. So that can actually help strengthen relationships at work. It improves confidence and communication skills. Saying no can be incredibly challenging. You know, I know that. But over time, as we practice, it builds up this confidence. And confidence and communication skills are incredibly powerful within your professional life. So as you develop these boundaries over time, you're actually developing a lot of these soft skills, which is incredibly powerful. And you'll carry them throughout your entire career. So a couple finishing notes. In saying no to something, so setting a boundary, you are saying yes to something else. No, I cannot work this evening. You're saying yes to doing something in your personal life, hanging out with your family, walking your dogs. You know, it's not just saying no, 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 no. When we say no, we say yes when it comes to boundaries. Professional boundaries help define and maintain your work-life structure. They really, really do. Over time, you know, if you don't have these boundaries in place, you'll just start to adopt all these things that people tell you. You should be working like this. This is how it should operate within your professional life. You lose this entire sense of control, you know, and you start to get all of these things that make no sense for you. You start to have all these boundaries that really never resonated with you in the first place. So it does help maintain your own work-life structure that you are in control of, that makes sense for you. Self-discovery and self-awareness are really, really the key for establishing your own boundaries, for figuring out what you need. And I really do encourage you to check in with yourself through every season of life. A couple years into my career, I started to lose who I was. I was like, okay, I know I'm working all the time and that's great. And I really do enjoy my job, but like, I don't know who I am. If I were to introduce myself to someone I met tomorrow, I don't know if I could do that without telling them what I do for work, because I don't know. So what I ended up doing, I won't tell you the whole story because it's too long, but I spent a year preparing to take a couple months off of an unpaid leave. And in that time, I took a step back to figure out, one, who I was, what I wanted, what working life and professional life meant for me, how a career kind of fit into my entire world, and how I wanted to approach that moving forward. And that was, a huge pivotal moment for me in my career. But I just urge you to check in with yourself through every season of life and never stop asking yourself, like, who are you? Figuring out more about yourself is something that we should all continue to do throughout life. So with that said, that's what I had for you today. And if there's any questions, we can jump into that now. I don't know how much time we have left.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. We do have time for a few questions, but do just want to thank you before we move into them, as people are throwing those in the chat. Really appreciate how candid you were, and the way that you structured your presentation to include scenarios and examples that, could, again, the nature of your delivery style resonate with people. So thank you so much for that awesome presentation.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. This is such a treat to be able to talk about something that I am so passionate about with such a great audience.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we feel your passion through the screen. So, you talk about boundaries changing in every season of life.
Mm-hmm.
And for many who are returning back to the office, they may not have had some boundaries in place. Now, they've been working from home for a couple of years, maybe in a different season of life than they were pre-pandemic. What strategies or recommendations would you have for them as they're re-entering the office with the same coworkers that they've been with virtually? How do they reinforce those new boundaries they may have?
Yeah, so I would start off with saying, when we think about going back to the office, we often think about going back in time. And the reality is, we're never going back to a pre-pandemic normal. We are shaping a new normal moving forward. So it really is the perfect time to start implementing new boundaries, because it's new for everyone. And I think that we get caught up thinking like, okay, well, things were like this when we were in the office before, so I guess it's going to have to be like that again. It absolutely does not. So now is a really, really good time to figure out what you need in the office, start putting these things into practice, because you are shaping your new normal.
Yeah, what a great response. And I completely agree. It is this chance to re-enter in a way that is new. We are entering into this new space. We're not going backwards. So love that future thinking approach. And you reviewed your establish, implement, and maintain, approach to setting professional boundaries. And I'm wondering, how can we support our colleagues and using that approach and sticking and reinforcing their professional boundaries?
Yeah, so I think as the role of a coworker, we need to encourage our coworkers to define their own boundaries. It is not our responsibility to define and tell people what boundaries that they need to set, because we're all incredibly different with our needs. I would say communication there is key. So once a coworker comes to you and they have a boundary set, it's your responsibility to support it how they need it to be supported, depending on what the boundary is. And so I would say, don't take on any bit of the trying to tell the coworker or, define their boundary for them. It really is up to them to communicate that. And then you respect it. You support it where it makes sense. If, you have hesitations, if it's a boundary that, is a little bit trickier to support, have that conversation with them, open dialogue. At the end of the day, we're all human. We're just doing the best that we can. And so engaging in that dialogue with them is quite powerful.
Yeah, fantastic. Love that kind of ally, like in the workplace relationship, not necessarily telling but guiding and supporting along that way. So to kind of take it back to the first bit of your presentation, when you were talking about TikTok and talking about how you went viral, Just kind of wondering what was going through your mind at that time when you decided to make your first video, and what were your expectations around putting it out there? I know you've said you've always been a creative person, so I'm
Yeah.
sure there's been many different outlets throughout the journey, but
Yeah.
just bringing it there.
Yeah, so let's go way back. So when I first started on TikTok, I had like 20 followers. I didn't really use the app. I didn't think much of it. We just transitioned to working from home, and I'm like, wow, this is weird. I am so isolated. I don't have my work bestie next to me to be like, hey, do you see what happened? And so I turned to like TikTok as a creative outlet to put some of the things I was experiencing into video form for my own entertainment. Let's get real. I was so bored at home. And I didn't think anyone would see them. I really didn't when I first started posting. And then people started following along. People started commenting. Some videos started going viral. And so many people were like, wow, I thought I was the only one experiencing this. And that to me was really what kept me going with it, because the last couple of years have been so lonely. And so to even open up a silly little video and be able to be like, oh my gosh, it's not just me, is the most rewarding piece of this whole TikTok thing. So it was a crazy experience when things started to blow up and when things started to grow. And my coworkers were like, I saw a video from you. My manager's like, and so this video. And so we'd talk about it, we'd laugh about it. And it was a way that actually brought us all closer together, because we were able to laugh about things. And it made work a lot more like human, I will say. And I've worked with incredibly supportive people. I've surrounded myself at work with people that professionally support me and they personally support me. And it really enabled me to be able to keep going with it and grow with it. But it's been a wild journey, and it's been a great old time.
Oh, fantastic. I'm sure that there are so many here in this audience, and I know with your TikTok work besties that are so glad that you went ahead and channeled that creative energy into going ahead and making that video, as a way to cope with the pandemic. And wonderful to hear that it opened the door for some, growth within your own workspace and among your colleagues as well. That is so awesome. And we have some folks wondering, what is next as you grow your community? What can they kind of expect from you? Are you looking to look at new topics, or where are you looking to bring the Work Besties fam?
That is a great question. And sometimes I think about that. I'm like, okay, let's plan for the future. Where are we going to go here? And then I realize that like planning in this life, especially this last few years, most of it's throwaway work because things change so incredibly quickly. So I think for me, it's just about keeping up with where I'm at professionally and where the work besties are at. And that's why it's so important for me to keep engaged with a community, because, I might be experiencing something or having something going on in my personal life, but there might be so many other people experiencing a similar thing that's different than mine. And so for me, it's all about that community engagement piece and hearing from the work besties community, making videos about what other people are experiencing too. So bringing their kind of voice and their creativity and their experiences into play in my content as well. In terms of what's next, big things though, I don't know. I guess we'll see. I'm kind of just rolling with the punches of life. This year is an interesting year of like, things are opening, life's kind of changing, and I'm just giving myself the grace to kind of go with it and not have any expectations for myself and take care of myself. That's my priority this year.
That is a great priority. I'm very happy to hear that, especially on our main stage. A great reminder for everyone. And we will certainly stay tuned. We're so excited to see what's next. We do have one other question here. I believe we have time for about one more. And that's how does your job, your employer feel about everything that you put on TikTok and Instagram? And how do you separate your career from your career in 9 to 5 from your social media career? How do you kind of delineate the two?
Yeah. So let's talk about the first piece in that. So I am incredibly mindful in all of my content since the start. When I'm making a video, when I'm naming a character, when I'm making a video about a specific experience, it is never tied directly back to anyone I've ever worked with, any experience we've ever specifically had. And so that creates quite a boundary for me when it comes to creating content, because no one I worked with could be like, that video is about me. Like, we just had that meeting, and that's a huge respect thing for me. Making content about working world is fun, but you need to keep that element of respect in it too, and try to keep it as professionally as possible. And And then the second piece there, I have always been I've had the ability to compartmentalize things. So my 9 to 5 is my 9 to 5. I show up, I do a dang good job at it. And then I show up for the social media stuff. And as much as some experiences can overlap, they are pretty different worlds at the end of the day. Making content is, a career path in itself. And you need to kind of keep those two separate. And I think that comes back to what I was talking about earlier in my presentation is I never attach identity, self-worth, value to a job. I never get lost in a job. I could change jobs tomorrow and I'm still the same person that I was. And I think that that's really enabled me on this journey to separate social media, work, and myself. We're all three very separate things. We're all integrated to an extent. But at the end of the day, I'm myself, my content's my content, work is work.
I love that. Laura, it has been an absolute pleasure. I absolutely love your responses to all these questions. Loved your presentation. Just so appreciate you joining us to talk about all things, setting professional boundaries, personal boundaries, effective communication. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been brilliant.
Awesome. And I know that our audience will eagerly await your next How Do You Professionally Say. So everyone here that is a work bestie online, stay tuned for what Laura has up next. So next up here on the main stage is a panel that is very timely and about an important topic. So stay tuned for Getting Election Ready. We do hope that you'll find this conversation informative. And I urge you to use your voice and cast an informed vote this election season. Since this is the last you will hear from Kristen and I on the main stage, we'd like to wish you a fulfilling conference experience. We hope to hear about some of your highlights, some of your takeaways. Online, again, you can tag us at NEXTNiagara, or this evening in person at 5 p.m. at Ironwood. As Kristen mentioned, you can still get tickets, and you can also get tickets digitally at the door. Before I pass the main stage over to Councilmember Amy Lloyd to introduce our panel, I would like to throw it to a message from Sarah Singleton at Niagara College, Canada.
Hello, everyone. I am Sarah Singleton, the Student Engagement and Leadership Program Coordinator at Niagara College, and I am so excited for everyone attending the Engage Conference. Niagara College's Center for Student Engagement and Leadership is dedicated to linking learning with lifetime leadership and enriching our students' experiences. We know just how important events like these are for young professionals. The Engage Conference is a chance to learn, grow, and connect with others across our region and beyond. The sessions you will take part in today are an opportunity to develop both personally and professionally. Niagara College is thrilled to have many students and alumni in attendance both virtually and in person. We are proud to sponsor many of our students to attend, and we are truly grateful to the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce for delivering this valuable programming to young professionals in our community. To the students and graduates, consider how this conference links to other personal and professional development events that you may have participated in as a student, from orientation, community engagement and volunteering, to our leadership development and mentorship programs. I encourage you to make the most out of today. This is truly a special time to engage with our community, build both your skill set and your network, and get involved outside of the classroom. Consider all the ways your own learning connects with these sessions you will attend today. It is my hope you will be inspired by the exciting sessions led by other professionals in Niagara and beyond, be it to foster your entrepreneurial spirit, find your purpose and pursue your passion, explore new career opportunities, or simply spark your curiosity about something new. To our students, alumni, and those in attendance, I wish you all the success as you grow into accomplished professionals in your respective fields. NC's mission is to enrich the lives and fulfill the dreams of our students. We could not do that without the partnerships and organizations like the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce. Their work and advocacy for Niagara's business community are helping our region prosper both economically and socially. Thank you again to the organizers for putting on this great event, and to all, please enjoy the conference.
Thank you for that amazing message, Sarah, and thank you so much, Niagara College, for all of your support throughout this whole conference planning process. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Lloyd. I am a Next Niagara Council member, and it is my pleasure to introduce our next session today, Getting Election Ready. As Alexis mentioned, hopefully through this next panel, you'll learn lots of information for the very timely and current election, but for many elections to come forwarding on. Moderating our panel this morning is our fellow NEXTNiagara Council member, Zach Dadson. Zach is a community relations advisor at Brock University and is passionate about civic engagement. As a NEXTNiagara Council member, as well as nonprofit board chair and an active member of his neighborhood association, the Fitzgerald Neighbors, Zach is a big believer in participating. Prior to joining Brock, Zach worked as the manager of community engagement for Chris Biddle, St. Catharines Member of Parliament. Joining Zach, we are very grateful to have our three esteemed panelists joining us. First, we have Ermac Tainer. Ermac is the outreach coordinator at Apathy is Boring, working with youth on civic participation and community engagement. Apathy is Boring is a nonpartisan charitable organization that works to support and educate youth to become active and contributing citizens in Canada's democracy. Ermac is passionate about inclusion and bridging individual and collective action. Welcome, Ermac. We also have joining us Lucas Spinoza. In 2015, Lucas opened what was then called the Black Sheep Lounge, a small cafe in the heart of downtown Welland. I've been there personally myself, and it is fabulous, I must say. After almost 7 years of business, the cafe has grown into a coffee roaster, which pushed the team to update the name to Black Sheep Coffee Roasters. Lucas's love for the community grew with daily interactions at the cafe, inspiring him to sit on local boards and committees, and eventually a successful run for a seat on Welland City Council in 2018. Welcome, Lucas. Lastly, we have Liam Midzain-Gobin. Liam is an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at Brock University. He is a settler scholar whose research focuses on Indigenous governance, settler colonialism, and Indigenous settler relationships as a form of international politics. Originally from British Columbia, Liam has also lived in Ottawa for university while working for the federal government and has spent time doing organizing work both there and in Hamilton. Zach, I'll pass it over to you. I'm sure you're going to lead a great conversation. I can't wait to hear what everyone has to say in this discussion.
Thank you so much, Amy, for welcoming us. And thank you for everyone for joining us. Laura's keynote this morning was so informative, and it was so exciting to be able to participate today in a conference that's specifically geared to the challenges that we as young professionals face. And Laura's keynote provided such great tools that we can utilize moving forward. I want to thank Lucas, Ermac, and Liam for joining me for this roundtable discussion this morning on getting election ready. We have 2 elections coming up this year, our provincial election on June 2nd and our municipal election in October. And while the issues that are debated by our local candidates and political leaders have an increasing impact on us as young professionals, it can be challenging to know how we can engage in the political process to ensure that the issues that impact us are truly addressed. I'm so excited by our diverse group of panelists this morning, and I'm so looking forward to your perspectives on how we as young professionals can engage in the political process. I'm going to direct our questions to specific panelists, but if anyone else has any feedback or wants to jump in, please feel free to do so. My first question is for Lucas. Lucas, with your political experience in Welland, I'm curious, can you tell us how do politicians determine what issues are priorities?
Well, first off, thank you very much for having me, guys. This is a really exciting opportunity, and I'm happy to be sharing the conference with these other 2 panelists. But politicians determining priorities, it's actually a little more simple than it seems. I think sometimes people get caught up in all of these different themes of the month, but at the end of the day, it comes down to doing the most good and the least amount of harm for as many people as possible. So I find at the local level, a lot of people get frustrated about street to street. I've lived here for 40 years and my street's never been done. And sometimes that is true and that's something that needs to be addressed. But, at the city of Welland, there's incredible staff. And so for a local politician running for city council, engage with city staff, find out what's on deck, which streets are going to be worked on, look at the master plans and see what the vision for the city is. And I think you can determine priorities that way a lot more effectively.
That's great. No, thank you so much. Ermac, I'm curious, what are ways that residents can raise the profile of issues that are important to them to ensure that they are gaining the attention of candidates?
Absolutely. There's a couple things that are perhaps more practical to think about. That could be joining in your neighborhood or community consultations, because oftentimes when there's a big decision being made, there's a consultation process that goes through. and you have a right to participate in that conversation. It could be reaching out directly to your MPPs or addressing, sharing on social media. But one thing that I would like to highlight is that if there's something that you care about, the odds are that probably there's somebody else out there who also cares about it. So finding your community in whatever issue it is that you care about and trying to organize around that collectively within your community definitely is a really, really strong point that I would encourage everybody to do.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you highlighted that. One of the things we talk a lot about in our neighborhood association, we feel that our Fitzgerald Neighborhood Association has two aspects. One is community building, but the other is amplifying our voice as residents, right? And knowing that we collectively can speak louder than we can individually. And so I think it's so great to be able to find ways of community building that will lead to that sort of amplification of issues. Lucas, I'm going to come back to you because I was also curious about something that you had said about engaging with municipal politics and determining priorities with local municipal staff. And I'm curious, municipal politics often hits the closest to home, and yet we often see the lowest voter turnout in municipal elections compared to our provincial and federal counterparts. And so what sorts of municipal issues impact young folks the most, and how can we engage in the decision-making process outside of just the election period?
It's a great question. When I ran for city council, I was 22 going on 23, and I don't think there was anything that really seemed relevant to me as a young person. But as I got a little bit older, I realized that it's really career and life building, and that's the number one thing. What is retention for young people, opportunities for young people. It's not just the streets and the sewers and the roads that are going to keep young people here. And so, I think one thing that is an incredibly important tool is having incentive programs, helping people start businesses, collaborations with local associations like with yourself with the Fitz neighborhood. There's also, BIAs, which are incredible tools, and, partnering with them and the cities. And that really helps to provide opportunities for young people. That's how I got involved was, the Welland Downtown BIA reached out to me and they wanted someone to help them with marketing and events. And so we started doing concerts and live streaming of movies and all sorts of things at City Hall. And it built from there. And then eventually we did a festival that brought 25,000 people to downtown Welland, and new businesses opened because of it. So the only way you're going to be able to get young people to get involved is if you start not just involving young people, but you have to provide opportunities for young people.
Oh no, that's so important. And we talk a lot about, in my previous life, we would have meetings lots of times and people would say, hey, I want to be involved in politics. How can I become a politician, or how can I get involved? And our feedback was always find issues that are really important to you and then find other people that are working in that space. And so I think that the BIA is such a great example of here's a group of people who are invested in the same thing that you may be invested in, and being able to work together to amplify your voices. Liam, this is a question I'm excited to get your feedback on. Young folks can often feel that their voices don't matter in politics, that politicians will say one thing and they will do another. Can you talk about the disconnect between grassroots action and the slow movement of government, and how can we not become cynical about the progress of government?
Thanks, Zach, and thank you to the organizers as well. And I maybe want to start off with my own question of what gives you the impression that there would be any sort of cynicism? We certainly haven't seen that ever from any level of government. But no, in all seriousness, I think what Lucas said at the beginning really is important to highlight, and I think it helps me build off of kind of where I want to go with this. And what I heard from Lucas was that politicians are going to come in, and those who want to be politicians are really coming in with their own set of goals and really actually trying to do good. And so in that case, I think what gets to be really important is kind of figuring out the different imperatives that different people come with, and the different goals that people have, and as well as the different pressures that different politicians are under, yourself as perhaps a young person, or somebody who just cares about issues. We're all going to have our own positions and our own pressures. And so in that case, it really is about figuring out what politicians are going to be responding to. And so I think what Irmak said about organizing, and certainly your experience in terms of your community organization and the associations there, or I think of something like the 15 in Fairness campaign, and getting these organizing networks together to try to really build a sense of pressure. And that helps to overcome that disconnect, because really what you're doing is you're getting a bunch of people involved, and you're showing to politicians that there actually is a constituency here for this. There is a reason for you to do this. And so when Lucas says, like, trying to do the most good for the most number of people, showing there are a lot of people that this could be really good for is an effective way of doing that. That doesn't mean it's kind of obviously going to happen or going to be the be all and end all, but certainly I think that organizing work is a really important first step.
No, that's so great, and I'm so interested in. I think that lots of times people can feel disenfranchised by political parties and the partisan base of politics versus issues-based engagement. And so I'm kind of curious, and I'm interested, Lucas and Intermac, your feedback too about the value of engaging in the political process from an issues-based perspective, like that 15 in Fairness campaign, and the success that those kinds of advocacy can have in terms of elevating issues to make it to create a situation where then politicians are then responding to these issues because of you have established that constituency that you have talked about, Liam.
Yeah, honestly, I think one of the biggest issues we've had in politics, I guess, over the past 40 years and getting greater, is the fact that there's a greater divide between political parties and polarization on issues. And the larger the setting, the more hostile it becomes. And I think social media makes our world and our room so big that it becomes so hostile and so unapproachable that, we're not really able to get much done. We think because of the name, social network, we're able to bring people together, more voices, but sometimes that's not the best thing. When I got my start in the community, I just went knocking on doors. I went to go see our MP, our MPP. I started going to city council meetings, and eventually, people start to notice that you're there, right? And you start asking questions. You stick around after council meetings. You get to talk one-on-one, and you start with this collaborative approach. And if you go in saying, "Why aren't you doing this and why aren't you doing that?" Immediately defensive mode, back against the wall, and now it's enemy versus enemy instead of this collaborative approach where something can really get done. And I think everyone's looking for that snap, immediate solution, but it's not the way it works. It takes a long time. It took me 3 years of volunteer work and showing up at council meetings before people started paying attention, but that's what it takes.
Definitely. And it also allows for going beyond the partisanship in a way that we can organize together, as you said, Lucas, in a collaborative way. And one thing to highlight would be, yes, elections are really important to get the voice that's in the community, what we care about, into a larger system. But at the same time, it's really important to remember that this is not just during the election time, and it's a whole process that's throughout the year, every single day. So whatever you do in each day of your life really counts. And that would, like, the engagement that you mentioned, Lucas, like you were volunteering for 3 years, and that first point of entry that seems so inaccessible for an outsider, perhaps, who's never done anything like that before, making sure that we're allowing that first point of entry to be as easily accessible as possible would allow for youth to be able to participate on a day-to-day basis, which will then build into maybe further involvement, more volunteering, then wanting to run for a position, and then bridging the gap between what an individual, a youth might want, a community wants, and what is really happening in a larger structure.
No, that's so great. I'm so interested in the discussion of amplifying our ideas and forcing politicians to engage with those constituencies. And Liam, I want to bring it back to you. There are other groups that have been very successful in making sure that politicians are talking about the issues that are important to them. Seniors do a very good job of this, right? They are able to speak with one voice about the importance for senior pensions and incomes, and they do a very good job of being able to hold governments to feel responsible for their issues. How have other groups been so successful in communicating their priorities and policy expectations, and what lessons can young people take from their success?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, and I think the seniors really display this really effectively, they've been able to organize, they've been able to coordinate, they've been able to mobilize, and they've done it around specific messages and specific asks. right? Like there are really, really effective organizations for seniors, with the Canadian Association of Retired Peoples really being at the forefront of that. But they've been able to figure out what those levers of power are. And, you know, I'm going to talk about lobbying, and it's not necessarily a dirty thing, but like they've been able to get in front of politicians. They've been able to actually build some public awareness campaigns around the issues they're facing. They've been able to have a sort of influence, both monetarily in terms of being able to donate to political parties and individual politicians, in terms of voting, certainly, you know, the kind of mantra being that seniors vote, and that's why they get paid attention to. But really importantly, they've been consistent in their messaging, and they've been coordinated in that as well. And so I think this is where that organizing bit comes in, and this is where that kind of connecting with those certainly around you, but also kind of around the province or the country when we start to think about broader issues. Connecting and building those networks to then be able to get your requests out and be able to build that momentum for it becomes a really, really effective political tool. And that's something that takes a lot of energy and takes a lot of focus. Things that young people certainly, I think, do have and are really effective communicators and really effective at building those connections. Even now, when we're still in the age of COVID, like, you know, young people are oftentimes much quicker to jump into WhatsApp or jump onto any of the various social media accounts or platforms, even something like Discord. Like, you can do organizing a lot of different ways in a lot of different forms. And, you know, really being able to coordinate that way is something that's been so effective for other groups. And there's no reason why young people can't do that too. It's really just about figuring out what those entry points are, like your Matt had talked about.
And Zach, if
You know,
I
I think
may
that
just build on,
please.
if I may just build on Liam's point, I think one of the key things he touched on is about young people not voting. There's a really important reason why that is. They don't feel like their voices are important, you know? And when I was running for Welland City Council, I'm not going to name specific neighborhoods, but my ward that I was representing, or I was running for at the time, was Ward 3. Now that's downtown and some of the new development areas. I had some past counselors or other politically engaged people tell me, don't go to certain neighborhoods because they don't vote. Don't bother knocking on their doors. You know, that demographic is not a voting type. So, you know, poor neighborhoods or certain other types of ethnic backgrounds, even, I was being warned not to bother. You know, they don't show up. And that's the dirty background secret of politicking and door knocking. But the reason why I did so well is because I hit those doors more than anybody else. And I hit them 2, 3, 4 times and waited. You know how many times people closed doors in my face and said, you know, I don't want to talk to you. But by the third time, they're like, okay, what do you want? You know, and I keep saying, I don't want to sell you anything. I want to know what you want to see happen in the city. And because of that, I did well. You know, and I think that's what needs to happen for young people to get engaged is other young people need to rally together and really just start knocking on the metaphorical doors, you know, whether that's through social media or at their university or colleges or even at the high school level. Just get people engaged and keep doing it until they start paying attention.
You know,
If I can quickly,
yeah,
sorry, no, just to very quickly build on Lucas's. Yes, like meeting people where they're at instead of expecting them to come to you. And that metaphorical door is so real. Like if youth are going to festivals or going to the mall or what XYZ location, going to places where they are and finding where they are to meet them where they are is so key.
No, absolutely. You know, and Liam, I'm so curious. Can you talk to us a little bit about how young folks can engage in the political process from an issues-based perspective rather than party-based politics? And I know that we have talked about this a little bit, but I'm so curious about, you know, if you could expand a little bit on why campaigns like the 15 in Fairness campaign have been so successful in being able to have parties then respond to and envelop those policies into their platforms. And I mean, you know, frankly, all three major parties in the provincial election have gotten to a point where they had all agreed that $15 was a minimum of what our wages should be in the province. And so I think that speaks over time. These have been really, like Lucas had said, but that over time these campaigns have been very successful. And so can you talk to us a little bit about how issues-based politics can be an effective way of engaging in the political process?
Yeah, for sure. So I think It really builds off of what each of us have been talking about this entire time. It's really about bringing people together and working towards a common goal and trying to get a specific set of messages out, but also set of expectations out, really. Like when we think about the 15 in Fairness campaign, it was incredibly effective, not in the least because it was really clear. Like, what do we want? $15 an hour minimum wage. And that evolved over time, and things can evolve over time because, parties started to get to, yeah, okay, we'll install a $15 minimum wage. And now we see, well, like that isn't enough, right? And so there's also that fairness bit that comes onto it, because that $15 is an entryway into talking about the fairness of our society and the fairness of the distribution of material goods within our society. And so that brings all kinds of different things, but that first hit is $15 an hour. And I think that coordinating around that, getting institutions and institutional actors, so I think especially unions were really effective at jumping on with the $15 in Fairness campaign. And they bring money, they bring resources, they bring people that can work and organizing capability. And so, like, that isn't to say that this is union led or you need to kind of glom onto the kind of campaign that an organization already wants to run. But that means, yeah, meeting people where they're at, figuring out what kinds of issues are actually really important, and figuring out what kinds of concrete policies or changes would offer that kind of change that young people especially are looking for right now. And figuring out, okay, how do I articulate that? How do I be clear about that? How do we be coordinated in messaging? And how do we put out a really, really clear argument for why this is important? And I think the 15 in Fairness campaign was really effective at that. They got a lot of support, and they were able to make this a really effective movement right across the country in many ways. And so by using all those tools of coordinating, of meeting people, of organizing, they were really able to make some important change and work with all parties, which is quite frankly something that not a lot of other campaigns have been really good at over the last 20 years.
No, I'm so interested in the success of progressive pressure that can be applied to politicians in encouraging them to make decisions that reflect the desires of their constituencies. And Lucas, I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about your experience on Welland City Council and what that pressure felt like from a politician's perspective. When it comes to affordable housing or developing housing developments, or comes to other issues that you would face at City Council, what were successful pressure? What did pressure look like from the residents that would want you to make a decision, and what was successful from those campaigns, and what lessons could be applied for young people looking to apply that same type of pressure to politicians?
That is an incredibly good question. Now, pressure comes in two different forms. And unfortunately, at the local level, because we are so accessible and so close, that pressure sometimes doesn't need to be a large group of people. And sometimes that pressure is misguided. And that's part of the reason why I had an early departure from City Council, is, if you're not actively engaged in it, or if you're not paying attention and you just start throwing pressure because that's what your friend says you should be doing, it's uninformed and it becomes something negative, and a lot of politicians don't have the backbone. And so, they hear something from, let's say it's 100 people. Well, that sounds like a lot of people, but when you're in a city of 58,000, 100 is a drop in the bucket. So is it what the 100 people want in this neighborhood association, or is it, a group of seniors that don't want a development next door, or who is it? You need to really balance the factors. But having said that, there's been pressure for things on the opposite side, which have been incredibly positive. And, politicians were not necessarily intentionally ignoring the issue, but it just didn't seem like something on their radar, and enough people started knocking. And eventually it became on the radar and we had to deal with it. And a lot of good has come from that, dealing with parks and having proper master plans. Obviously everyone wants to talk about taxes, but I mean, up or down a percent makes almost zero difference. Most residences, a percent on their taxes, property taxes, about $32 in either direction. So even a 10% tax decrease at a property tax level is only about $300. And yes, that's a good savings, but 10% from everybody in taxes, we're going to lose a lot more at the city level. So pressure is tricky. It could be, that's why communication is important, because pressure doesn't always mean positive, but it also doesn't always mean negative.
If I can jump in there, Zach, too,
Please.
I think when we talk about pressure, it's not even just the pressure that individuals can bring, but it's also the pressure that systems have built in them, right? When we're talking about city master plans, when we're talking about property taxes, those are pressures and kind of constraints that are set by the institutions and by the systems that we're having to work within. And so it's really figuring out the pressures that politicians are under, I think, from both sides, both from those institutions as well as from residents, and figuring out, okay, how, if we're really trying to advocate and work with somebody like Lucas, who, you know, has similar ideas to what we want to achieve, how do we strategize together to figure out the best way to actually make this work and kind of push the system to do what we want for us? That's something I think that seniors have been really effective at, and they've figured out what those pressure points are, both individually, but also within the system. And so I think that is something to keep in mind as well.
No, absolutely. Yeah. No, thank you so much. And Ermac, I'm curious about your perspective. Can you talk to us a little bit about ways that young people can be involved in the political process, other than necessarily just like, you know, voting and running? What are ways that we can engage with our politicians and kind of hold them to account on these things that we've been talking about?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many different ways. Being informed, being number one in the process, but being, in terms of being more engaged directly with the politicians and the candidates on the ground, it seems quite perhaps like unconventional at this point for a young person, because even going up and talking to professors can seem very intimidating, like, oh, I'm gonna go to their office and talk to them. That's weird. But going to those spaces in person or picking up the phone and calling are actually direct action methods that do yield results, because you have a right to ask your questions, you have a right to participate, and knowing this is really powerful, because there is a way in which youth are made to feel like their voice doesn't matter and they just wouldn't know, and they're too young and their experience doesn't matter. And it is important to remind ourselves that they also do have a voice and can participate in all these different ways. And so programs and educational tools that allow for this participation to be as easy as possible for them are really key to bring them into the system of participation.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much. You know, this is the thing that I'm mostly interested in. I know that we, you know, especially right now during an election campaign, it can seem easy to access politicians or whatever the case, but I'm so interested in the work that happens in between these elections and how we as young professionals can ensure that the issues that are important to us continue to be at the forefront of political agendas and platforms. And so thank you so much, each of you, for participating. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I'm just curious if perhaps each of you would like to share some final thoughts or some key takeaways that you'd like us to remember after today's panel. And Lucas, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. Honestly, it's refreshing to hear from Liam and Ermac, and also yourself, Zach. When you get into the political process, it's exciting, you know, especially when you start to see some success. And when things start to get difficult, it's easy to become cynical and really kind of nihilistic about the whole political process. But it's important to continually work with people like yourselves and just keep the conversation rolling. And it reminds you why you should be instilling hope and why the youth generations are always that light, that beacon for the past generations. Myself, I went through the same thing. On, you know, the last 6 months I was on Welland City Council, I was, you know, it felt like I was spiraling. You know, I'm like, I feel like I was the only person who wasn't going crazy, or the only person going crazy, right? Like, why is no one else seeing this? But, you know, talking to other young people and seeing the impact that you have as an individual, as a leader, people really, really do crave for young leaders, and you need to stick to it. You don't need to necessarily become a politician to do that. You know, there's a lot of really important roles outside of the political system that influence politics. And if you're not the kind of person to stand up on a stage and point your finger, then it may not be for you. But there's so many different volunteer roles, boards and committees, you know, youth councils, so many different opportunities. So, you know, I would recommend anyone who's, you know, It doesn't even matter the age. Anyone who's never been involved with politics or has a great idea, just reach out to one person. Any of us on the panel, anybody else that's coming up in the rest of this conference, any one of your local politicians, and don't just wait for politicians to come and do their whole route and check off the boxes, because they hit a poor community. They hit the seniors, they hit the realtors, they hit the business people, they hit the youth, and they check their boxes. And not saying that they're not genuine about their interest, but when you're talking to 10,000 people, you cannot possibly remember every name and every issue. They have staff whispering saying, hey, this person, you met them 3 weeks ago. This is so-and-so, and this is the business they own. And then it's, yes, they're shaking the hand and taking the picture, and it's they seem like they remember you, but they don't. So you really need to just keep harping, keep your voice heard, but also your ears open too, because you learn a lot throughout the process. And I've learned a lot on this panel. So thanks so much for having me.
No, I'm so glad. One of the questions that we had just come in talked about what does being engaged or getting involved look like outside of just not becoming, outside of being a politician. And I think that those are some really great examples, And one of the things that I want to quickly highlight is also the importance of budget processes. Like municipal, provincial, federal governments all go through a budget process. And that is really kind of where the rubber hits the road in terms of actually their priorities, getting funding behind them. So I think it's such an important opportunity annually to be able to participate and engage and organize around budget making processes to ensure that the issues that you care about are being addressed by your local members, whoever they are. Rebecca, can you talk a little bit more, wrap up and tell us a little some final thoughts about being engaged from a young person's perspective?
Absolutely. Engagement really can look in so many different ways for so many different people, because we all have our different comfort levels and boundaries of what we are able to do. And it's really about building what engagement is going to look like for you. But examples could be, from the very basic, it starts from talking about it with your friends and family, starting the conversation in your immediate circle, which then becomes a larger and larger circle that connects to each other. But starting the conversation with your friends or family, reading the news, signing a petition, if there's an organizing going out to that. If there's a candidate, you can support them by volunteering. If there's a campaign being run, you can support that. If there's a community organization that's working on an issue that you care about, you can volunteer for them. It's really about first deciding what matters to you, what do I care about, and how can I be part of something bigger than that, start my engagement there. And remembering that it is really important to remember that you're really not alone in this. I know it's like we've all said it a lot of times, but it really does matter to remember that we are all part of a community and you're not alone in it. And it's really about going out and finding that. I also do want to add a note on participating in an institutional level a bit more, and building on what Lucas mentioned, your experience on feeling like, am I the only person who's going through this? And the support structures that exist or not exist for youth to be able to participate in these institutions and to navigate them. Because a lot of the times it's even challenging to have access to the tools that will allow you to let alone enter, but also be okay and perform well in those institutional spaces. And we actually have a program called Build that is virtual and national, that is a training and educational program for youth to navigate spaces if they're looking to create institutional change. It's a 3-month program where you're going through mentorship and different workshops to learn how these systems work. Because if you know how the systems operate, then you feel empowered to then partake in them and feel the agency you have to create the change you want to see. But if we're not given the tools, then it feels very disempowering to start engaging with them to begin with.
Yeah, Liam, can you share your final thoughts with us?
Yeah, so I don't want to take up a ton of time, because I think my main final thought is you should listen to Irmak and Lucas, because they had excellent things to say. But if I can kind of highlight one aspect of that, it's really that, not to do too much. I know the panel's called getting election ready, but I think elections are maybe not the best time for you to think about really trying to engage deeply if you want to change opinion on what politicians see as necessary to really tackle. In academia, we talk about it as agenda setting, but really it just means that you're getting your issues to the top of that agenda for people. And a lot of that work takes place before elections actually are kicked off and in between elections, and really having both parties but individuals feel like the issue that you really care about matters. And so you do that by organizing, just like Irmak and Lucas said, and working together. And I think that if youth and young people want to be involved in politics, there are a lot of things that we care about, a lot of different issues. And so it really is about connecting with people and figuring out how to have your voice be heard in that way.
Excellent. This has been such great discussion and really great feedback. Irmak, Lucas, Liam, thank you very, very much for your time this morning, and your perspectives and your experience left me feeling very excited about the avenues and opportunities that we have to engage in the political process. And I'm looking forward to being able to kind of take these lessons away and implement them in the coming months. Thank you very, very much for your time. I also want to thank again, our co-title sponsor, DDL & Co. and the Niagara Region Economic Development for powering this event, and the rest of our sponsors who made today possible, including our main stage sponsor, Niagara Community Foundation, King Events, CAA Niagara, 105.7 The Move, RBC Royal Bank, 610 CKTV, and Niagara College Canada. At this time, we will move to our breakout sessions. The Zoom links can be found on the agenda page. Please note that due to unforeseen circumstances, Deepika Kumar, who was presenting career and networking across the public sector organizations and the government, career education and developing for growing professionals, will not be able to join us, and we will have to cancel this session. We do apologize for any inconvenience. But if you don't have tickets yet for the in-person social at Ironwood Cider House tonight, you can still get them in advance on the register tab, and we'll have them available at the door as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and wishing you the very best for the rest of a great day.